Hey there BookTube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing good where you are. And today I'm doing the Russian Lit Party book tag. This is created by Stephanie at Miss Richards Reads, and I was very kindly tagged by Christina from Knitting Books, etc. And if you're anything like me, the first thing that you think of when you hear Russian Lit Party is Tolstoy in a party hat, which is a good image to have in your head. Essentially, it's just taking the things you'd expect to find maybe with some of these famous Russian writers, and then using that as a prompt so you find books that are similar. I'm using mostly classics for this, but if you decide to do this tag in the future, you don't have to do classics. That's just something I decided to do to make it a little bit more fun. Let's get right into it. So the first prompt is favourite classic, so a nice generic question, which is also very hard. So I had a nice old think about it, because the first thing I would have gone with was Thomas More's Utopia. It's one of my favourite books, but it's not really a book that I love for its writing. It's very dry, and it's more about its ideas and the connections that I make after putting the book down. So it's, in some ways there might be another book that's a bit more fitting, at least for a situation like this. So I had another think, and I was trying to think of a book that maybe has some great ideas. I love, ideas in a book, nice big ideas, something juicy to chew on, but also with great characters, great writing, an interesting, exciting plot. All those things, and the book that just screamed at me when I was thinking along those lines was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And the more I think about it, there are very few novels, at least of around the period that I'm thinking about, that I think can compete with Frankenstein for me. So yeah, this is one of my favourite classics, if not my favourite classic. For anyone who doesn't like the dog-eared pages, they wouldn't like the sight of that. Just got a few of my favourite passages just sort of dog-eared and ready to go if I want to just have a quick look over them. Right, oh sorry, my nose is slightly blocked. So number 2 is Tolstoy. So this is a character or book with a tragic story, or a book that made you cry. Books don't often make me cry, so I couldn't really think of one straight off of that. But certainly for a tragic book, I couldn't think of anything more tragic than the Iliad by Homer. And by the end, it is just very, very sad. Just the sheer amount of destruction and the waste of life. It's quite awful. But also one of the things that, at least for me, I found tragic was the way that a lot of what so many of the characters are doing kind of filled me with a kind of disgust, which maybe got away with, or got in the way of some kind of empathy between me and the characters, which is normally one of the things I really read for, that kind of connection. But it wasn't there so much because of this just disgust that I was feeling. And it's still an enjoyable reading experience, and I love the Iliad, but it's maybe tragic that wasn't there in that instance. Then number 3 is Gogol. So this is a comedic book or character, and for me, one of the books that's made me laugh the most is Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. I think it's just that kind of sincere and innocent naivety there with the characters, and just when they're talking about these sort of romantic gothic novels like Anne Radcliffe and stuff, and just the way our protagonist is just so in that world, whereas everything going around her is quite mundane, really. And it just kind of reminded me of maybe being a bit of a silly, over-imaginative teenager. So in some ways it's kind of relatable, and that's where a lot of the humour for me lies. Then number 4 is Dostoevsky. So this is a book with great character development. Now, I could have very easily gone with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, but I thought I'd maybe be a little more normal with my choice. And I was thinking of Nostromo by Joseph Conrad, which has come up a few times recently. It was one of my favourite books last year, and I suppose it's not necessarily character development, but it kind of feels like it, because as the book goes on, you're peeling back layers of these characters, because they've put so many layers, so many walls up around them, just so they can survive in their situation. So a lot of the characters, even female characters in this book, are quite opportunistic, and so peeling back the layers to actually see what their real motivations and intentions are is really interesting. So yeah, fascinating little book. Then next up is Chekov. So this is a novella or a short story, and I've got here my trusty sort of short story anthology, That Glimpse of Truth, edited by David Miller. And I just had a quick leaf through here just for a short story that really popped for me, that really jumped out. And the one I settled on was if you can see that, it's The Rocking Horse Winner by D.H. Lawrence. It's sort of a ghost story. It's about a little boy who, when he gets on his rocking horse, he kind of goes into a bit of a trance or a fit or something like that, and he has a kind of connection with another spiritual plane or something like that. So it's quite creepy. I haven't read it in a while, but that's a great short story if you're into that sort of thing. Then number 6 is Pasternak, a love story or a book with a relationship in it. And we're back to Jane Austen again, and we're with my favourite Jane Austen novel, and that's Persuasion. And I think it's just the initial sort of tragic kind of setting of this book, of an engagement, a relationship that hasn't turned out the way that our protagonist hoped, and it feels like a lost opportunity. And I think that initial almost disappointment of that kind of a quiet tragedy is the only way I can think of describing it. I don't know, it gets me quite kind of cuts in quite deeply to me emotionally, and so having the sort of relationship sort of maybe being built up a bit later on in the book, having that initial tragedy just pulls at my heartstrings a little bit more. So yeah, love Persuasion. And number 7 is Pushkin, who was, according to this prompt, a polyglot with a gift for languages. So they're asking for translated work. And instead of just giving you some straight up translations, I was thinking of instances where someone has written a version of a work from another language, but it's not necessarily a translation. Just because I find that quite interesting, in the sense that, particularly today, a lot of people are talking about how can a translation really be, the original text just in another language. That's kind of impossible, because there's going to be interpretation, there's going to be certain choices that the translator has to make. So I've got 2 examples here. The first one is where, in a way, the approach of the translator was to kind of translate, but no one really sees it as that really anymore. That's the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam by Edward Fitzgerald. And if you just look at the spine here, so we have Omar Khayyam, who's the original poet here, but then it's Edward Fitzgerald's name there, as if he was the author. It's not translated by Edward Fitzgerald. I suppose that here it just say done into English by Edward Fitzgerald, but when you read anthologies of English literature and things like that, this poem is always there under Edward Fitzgerald's name. And in this edition that I've got, it has 2 versions that he did, and they're both significantly different. So he's made quite a lot of very liberal choices with this poem, and it's still a great poem for what it is, and it's very, very enjoyable. but it's not a straight translation. And then a similar thing, maybe a more self-conscious instance of this. Sorry, they've got the rabbits out, so I'm just making sure they don't eat all these books. Yeah, a more self-conscious effort would be John Paterson's Orpheus, which is a version of Rilke's sonnets to Orpheus. And I suppose the most obvious thing that he does here is he gives these sonnets titles, which they don't have in, with Rilke's sonnets to Orpheus. They're all untitled. But it'd be very fascinating to read this alongside the sonnets to Orpheus and just see how different it is, because it seems like these are, not just translations, but also very obvious interpretations of what he thinks Rilke was trying to say. So he might be pushing a bit further in that kind of direction. And I'd be interested to find more instances of this happening with translation, where they've decided to write a version and not a translation. And then number 8 is Letters from Russia. So this is a non-fiction book. And I was looking through my non-fiction books, and I just couldn't really find anything that I felt like showing you in the typical sort of non-fiction, like like a history book or a travel book or a book on the environment or something. I just couldn't really find one that clicked for this tag. So I thought of this book, which is the Ode Less Travelled by Stephen Fry, which is a poetry writing book. It's got also lots of prompts in there for writing poems, and it's Stephen Fry talking about his journey with poetry, with reading and writing poetry, and just getting you to appreciate poetry and get you writing it just for yourself. And so it goes right in with all kinds of forms and stuff like that, and discusses some of the major sort of classic poets and some more contemporary poets, and it's a lot of fun. So there's my little non-fiction pick for this prompt. And then the 9th prompt is Lit Party. So that's, if you could have a coffee with any author, who would it be and why? And a lot of authors that I love that I'd maybe be quite scared to have a cup of coffee with. But I was actually thinking of Joseph Conrad. I've been thinking about him a lot recently. And I think he'd just be a fascinating person to sit and have a coffee with. I'm sure he'd have quite a lot of stories to tell from his time at sea and stuff like that. And being someone who, he was from Poland, then he moved to France, then he moved to England. And so I'm sure he has lots of really interesting life experience and lots of interesting things to talk about. So I'd love to have a chat with Joseph Conrad over a coffee, or I'm sure he'd probably prefer something a bit stronger. And then before I go, it asks you to tag some friends. And so first off, before I forget, I want to tag Freddie from The Sluggish Reader, just because I haven't tagged Freddie in a while, so tagging you. And then I want to tag a few channels that I've found recently. Some of them quite small, some of them a little bigger, but they're just new to me. And so I'm going to tag Inklings, I'm going to tag Lindy's Magpie Reads, Rachel B, and Serene Sloth. So all those channels will be down below, but as always, if you want to do this, if this is interesting and sounds fun, please feel free to do it. There we have it. That is the Russian Lit Party book tag. Apologies if there weren't more Russian writers in there. Hopefully that will improve by the end of this year. But I hope you're doing well. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.